The hair is wet, but the coffee is made. Pfft. So we're gonna make it work, okay? Because we are working on a limited time schedule. And making recommendations is hard sometimes. So we're just gonna roll with it. Also, walk, don't run to your local Target, because at least at mine, their limited edition Good and Gather coffees are on the shelves. And the pecan pie one, is it pecan or pecan? Comment below. Their pecan pie limited edition Good and Gather coffee is top tier. Grab yourself a little caramel drizzle while you're in there. Do a caramel drizzle in your cup, pecan pie coffee. Thank me later. Hi guys, we are back with another one, and we are doing another one of my favorite videos, which is a subscriber asks video, meaning that I received a comment asking for my recommendations on what to read if you're just getting into fantasy, or if you think that you want to start reading the fantasy romantasy genre and you're not quite sure where to start or where to go, or if you've tried fantasy before but it's just not like hitting for you, right? It can be a tough genre to sort of break into, and I understand that the way I feel about certain like literary fiction genres and stuff like that is like an intense intimidation, and I understand that fantasy can be that way for other people. So I got a comment asking for me to do a video for fantasy reader newbies, not knowing where to start or feeling intimidated by the genre, if I could give you guys some recommendations on what I think would be good choices that would kind of baby step you into possibly liking fantasy romantasy. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to structure this. I mean, like, this isn't a revolutionary video, okay? Like, you could Google or YouTube search like fantasy recs for beginners videos and watch 100,000 of them and get a cornucopia of recommendations and advice from experienced fantasy readers. However, I did that when I was trying to get into fantasy, and I got overwhelmed because you could watch 100 different people give you 400 different book recs. And I kind of watched too many videos and found myself like back at the starting block being like, now I just don't even know where, like I watched 100 videos and I still don't know where to start. And the one thing that I took from that was what was kind of a missing element from those videos was they just took the reader and they just tried to throw you into fantasy. And doing recommendation videos for me is so hard because it's not a face-to-face conversation. Like, if you called me up and you go, hey girl, want to go get a coffee? And I was like, yeah, let's go get a coffee. And then when we got there, you were like, let's talk about books. Could you give me any fantasy recommendations? I really want to get started in romantasy or something like that. It wouldn't just be like, oh, well, here's 20 books off the top of my head. Like, I would have follow-up questions, right? Like, I'd want us to have a conversation. I'd want to hear, like, tell me about what books you love, because that will guide me into what I think you might like. So this video is going to be structured a little differently because I don't think it's possible to give recommendations without knowing where you're coming from and what books you've liked. So we are going to break this down into categories for if you're coming from this genre and you're wanting to break into fantasy, these are the books that I would go into. However, if you're coming from this genre and you're looking to get into fantasy, this is where I would come from because they're different. A horror reader is going to come from a different place from like a historical fiction reader, right? So you're going to like different things. So I'm not going to cover all genres today. If you like this video and you want me to continue moving forward with more specific genres or even like micro genres into fantasy, I certainly can, but we're just going to cover what I would consider like the big players today. The other thing that's so important to consider is what is the level of spice that you're looking for. I don't think it's a secret that fantasy, specifically romantasy, it can be quite spice heavy. It doesn't have to be, but it can be. So if you and I were in Starbucks or in a coffee shop having coffee and you asked me for these recommendations, I'd ask, what genre is your favorite? What books are your favorite? What are you, where are you coming from? And how much spice do you want or enjoy? So basically, if you're telling me that you're coming from closed door YA romance, I'm not going to throw you directly into you know, a book series like A Court of Mist and Fury with like the second book of the ACOTAR series. You're not going to like it. It's going to be jarring. And I could see where you would like read the first smut scene and close the book and be like, not for me. This isn't my thing. So I have to know where you're coming from, and it will dictate where you're going. So let's talk about that. Okay, so the first category I want to talk about is if you are a primarily romance reader, which is a massive genre, I understand that, but if you're a primarily romance reader and you're trying to break into fantasy, where do I think you should start? And let's start with our more spice moderate, like low to moderate spice level recommendations. So obviously, the first thing I'm going to recommend for you is Harry Potter. Now, keep in mind that when you are reading YA specific books, which I often struggle with, I'm going to just preface this recommendation by saying, I get it, girl. Okay, I get it. It's young. But go in knowing it's young. It won't jar you as much. Go in knowing that these are young kids, okay? Which is also going to keep your spice level down. So balance it out. So I'm going to go ahead and say that most readers' fantasy journey started with Harry Potter. That's just the way it goes. For me, I've told this story in the beginning of my Harry Potter Choose My Reads video. My mother brought this book home completely randomly from a bookstore on her way home from work. And I was a primarily classic reader. I told the story, I was reading Moby Dick when she brought this home. And I think before that I had read the Through the Looking Glass, like the Alice in Wonderland series by C.S. Lewis. So I think when she brought this home, I read the synopsis and I was like, a book about a boy who finds out he's a wizard and goes and does magic with wands and broomsticks. And I was kind of looking at her like, thanks, Mom. Like, it was so out of character for not only me, for her. Like, we didn't read these things together. And this is really what opened my eyes to a magical world of reading, quite literally, pun intended, a magical world of fantasy. This right here is the series that I attribute to my ability to see books like movies in my head as I'm reading, because I read this book and I envisioned every single character, every single theme. I don't think I need to give you a giant synopsis on Harry Potter, but if you have somehow lived under a rock somewhere for the last 30 years, Harry Potter is a book about a boy who has been orphaned and raised, taken in by his aunt and uncle, who are not very kind to him, actually make him sleep in a cupboard under the stairs. So that's the level of care this boy is getting, who finds out through a series of events that he is actually a wizard and that his aunt and uncle have been keeping his mail from him because in the mail is an invitation to a magical school called Hogwarts. And it kind of evolves from there. This book is so incredible, and this series is so incredible. I have talked also about how I do not cry when I'm reading books. I cried in this series because these characters felt like family by the end. So if you are a YA romance reader looking to get into fantasy, do not discount the multiple storylines of adorable, cute little closed-door romance that is in Harry Potter. I really think you might find that you're so attached to the characters, you pull for their relationships and you pull for the story. So if you are a YA romance reader, don't shut out Harry Potter as a way to get into fantasy. So after you're done with Harry Potter, or if Harry Potter isn't for you, I actually am 2 out of 3 books into the Hunger Games series, and I'm really liking this. Now, in my opinion, neither of these stories are super romance heavy, but Hunger Games is certainly more romance heavy than Harry Potter, in a very closed door way still, obviously. But my point is, romance is a more centralized theme quicker in the series than Harry Potter is. If you don't know what Hunger Games is, it's basically about this dystopian world where the elites rule over different districts of lower, quote unquote, lower hierarchical society members. And basically, seemingly for the elites' entertainment, they have these Hunger Games where they throw in a male and female representative from each of the poorer districts to this fight to the death, basically. And if you make it out alive, there's some benefits for your family and your district. So it is very good. It's well written. Little bit YA cringy, but you get over it pretty quickly. Okay, moving down the line of our YA closed door recommendations, Harry Potter and Hunger Games are admittedly pretty young choices. So if you think I'm not into Harry Potter, I'm not into Hunger Games, you know, like me, I'm 36. So if I'm in, you know, your 30s, that's not your journey. You don't want to get into little middle grade, closed door series, and you're looking for something just a little bit more elevated than that, I would go for Powerless by Lauren Roberts. This is Lauren Roberts' debut novel, and I'm going to tell you right now, the writing isn't great. It's not fantastic. However, what you lose in style and refinement and poise, you do make up for in a very simple story with a very simple world to understand and a very simple relationship between characters. There's nothing overly overcomplicated in this book, which I think makes it a great choice for people coming from romance, wanting to break into fantasy, but feeling just a wee intimidated and not really knowing where to start. So if you haven't read Powerless, this follows our main female character, Peyton, who lives in a world where a virus swept through the land. And when the virus was done, it either left you with an extraordinary power or nothing, in which case you were called an ordinary. The ruling class of this kingdom basically said that the ordinaries, the powerless, were the vermin that essentially spread this virus and led to this mass death of her kingdom. And they have now deemed it necessary to kill off all the ordinaries. Well, Peyton has managed to fly under the radar. She is an ordinary, but she has been hiding the fact that she has no power by pretending that she is a very low-level psychic. Well, through a series of events, she ends up getting nominated by her village to go into this series of games, which in my opinion is not very well explained. I did read the little novella and I do have Reckless on my shelves. I'm waiting to read the second book because I'm hoping that the reason for the games existing is a little bit better explained in the second book, which it probably won't be. Who knows? But she's basically thrown into these silly little games, and it just follows a romance, love triangle, wide shoes type of situation. And if you're coming from romance, I could see where you would really, really like that dynamic in this book, and where it wouldn't be a very hard transition from standard romance novels. I think I gave this like a 3.5 stars. So it wasn't my favorite, but I appreciate it for what it was, and it's her debut novel, so I give her some grace. It is 100,000 degrees. I needed a cold drink, so we're going to be working with 2 Stanleys over here. Also in the vein of seeming and reading a little bit older than Harry Potter, Hunger Games, and maybe even Powerless, which still does read just a tad bit young, I'm also going to suggest Red Queen. I did just finish Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. This is once again closed door. You are going to see a little bit of kisses, maybe a little bit of like implications in characters' thoughts, but definitely no spice, one chili pepper type of action here. And a very good story with very detailed writing from a little bit more of an experienced author. I don't know if Red Queen was Victoria Aveyard's debut. I would have to look, but I thought that the writing was very elevated in this series when you're comparing it to something like a debut like Powerless. But basically, if you don't know what this is about, this follows our main female character, Mare Barrow, who lives in a kingdom that is controlled by elites, which are the Silver Bloods, and everybody else kind of is the workhorses. These are the commoners, the Red Bloods, who do the grunt work. Well, through a series of events, our female main character, Mare, finds out that there might be more to her than meets the eye, and she might not be as common of a red blood as one would immediately think. So it's very good. It is a good combination of romantic plot with a fantasy world, incorporating this different colored blood in a fantastical way. But I think that romance readers would be able to kind of hang on to the romance plot line, and it would carry them through the story in a comfortable way. So Red Queen might be a good option for you. Next up, I have to do it. I have to do it, and hear me out, because this recommendation does have a bit of a caveat. A Court of Thorns and Roses, book 1. Okay. This is probably going to be the spiciest of the recommendations in this more YA category, but I still would classify book 1, A Court of Thorns and Roses itself, as a YA book. It does have a little bit more action and certainly more allusions to spice. I would probably give this like 2 chili peppers. However, moving on in the rest of the series is full spice. Okay, so this is a good introduction, but know that the rest of the series gets a lot more graphic and a lot more adult. Keep that in mind when you go into it. If that's not something you're going to want to progress through, maybe don't go for this one. But this is a very loose Beauty and the Beast retelling about our female main character, Feyre, who lives in a very poor town from a very poor family. And she is supporting her family, which is her 2 sisters, Nesta and Elaine, and her father. And she does all the work. She hunts, she gathers, she fixes things. She, I believe, is the only one in her family that is actually working. So she is the workhorse supporter, quote unquote, breadwinner for her very poor family. She goes out into the woods one day and shoots a wolf who she thinks is an animal that could feed her family, but it turns out to be basically like an animal shifted fairy from the fairy realm, and his, I don't want to give away too much. And his family member comes basically to say, you have 2 options. I either kill you in revenge for my family member, or you come with me as my prisoner back to the fairy realm, which could be very dangerous for a human. And you're basically my captive for life. And obviously she takes what seems to be the only option, which is going back to the fairy realm, and the story takes off from there. A Court of Thorns and Roses is not the best in the series for me. I think I gave this book like a 3.5 stars, but the rest of the series is a 5-star, and the series overall is a 5-star series. This is so good. It is a great way to go from the romance genre to the fantasy genre, because romance is an overarching theme throughout the entire series, but it also has such a fantastic plot line with characters that you will become so invested in. So I think if you can continue on with the series handling a little bit more spice, this is a really great transition into fantasy. Next up, we have Divine Rivals. Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross is... I struggled so hard as to whether to put this in the recommendation for romance readers or literary fiction readers, which is coming up. But I think I went overall with romance, taking Ruthless Vows into, which is the second book, into account, because I think that the relationship between our female main character Iris and our main male character Roman is the crux of what this story really depends on and is based on. If you did not have the dynamic between Iris and Roman, you could take it and put it more as a literary fiction fantasy, but because that soulmate relationship exists, I think that romance readers would more identify with the storyline than maybe a literary fiction reader. If you don't know, very basically, Divine Rivals is about 2 rival workers or journalists at a newspaper. I think it's called, what is it, the Herald Tribune or something like that. And there is currently a war going on between the gods in this world. And Iris and Roman are workplace rivals fighting for who gets the wartime coverage of this god's war that's going on. And through a series of magical typewriters, they become able to send encrypted messages using these typewriters. I don't want to give away too much, but it's fantastically written, beautifully written. It is a bit meandering at times, so it would be very specific. If you're a very action-packed person, this might not probably be for you, but if you're looking for beautiful writing that you're going to get lost in and a slow pining, slow burn romance, you're going to love this. Very quotable. And last but not least, in our more closed door recommendations, I have The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This is kind of like, I've always described this book as a mix between like Twilight and The Bachelor. Basically, the story is about our female main character, Alessandra, who is from a poor family in their kingdom, and they find out that the Shadow King of their kingdom, who is this cruel, kind of domineering king who controls shadows is going to call a bunch of girls from the different districts into the castle to choose a wife from them, essentially, which is where that bachelor element comes from. And our main female character, Alessandra, decides that she doesn't like the whole system they've been living under. She doesn't like this competition, and what she's going to do is try to become one of the girls he invites so that she can kill the Shadow King. And the story goes on from there. This book shocked me. I got this picked in one of my TBR spin wheels, and I remember getting it just being like, oh, okay, like, this wasn't what I would have prioritized on my fantasy shelves, but I guess the spin wheel picked it, and I was so surprised by how much I loved it. This book is so good. Don't discount this, and if you are a romance reader looking to get into fantasy, I think you might really like this. Next, let's get into our romance readers that are okay with just a bit more spice and are willing to get just a bit more risque with it, because obviously there's no hiding the fact that romantasy does kind of get smut heavy. Now, with that being said, just like there are different categories of romance, there are different categories of romantasy, right? So like, you're going to get some romance that's more artistic literary fiction romance, and you're going to get some more romance that are like the small covers with the naked dude torso on it. You know what I'm saying? You catch my drift? That's the same as fantasy and romantasy. You can run the gamut of it. There's so many different microtropes and tropes. So it's impossible to kind of recommend them all, but I'm going to go with what I think would have helped me transition into fantasy when I was new. So first up, I have to recommend Guild by Raven Kennedy. This book has really taken my life by storm this year. I think this got like a 4.5. I think both of them, Guild and Glint, book 2 got a 4.5 for me, or a 4.75. I think it was really close to being 5-star, and I can see if the books continue in this trajectory, the series being a 5-star series for me overall. This is a King Midas retelling about our main female character, Orin, who is gold touched, and it has everything. It has romance, it has intrigue, it has different love interests, it has fairies, it has pirates, it has an epic journey, it has different kingdoms warring. I mean, if you can't imagine it, it's going on in this book with a little bit of spice. I like it. It's not a little bit. It's probably a moderate amount of spice. I would give book 1 probably like 3.5 chili peppers. And book 2, I think, actually had less spice than book 1 a little bit. I'd probably give that one like 3. But there is definitely spice in this book. There are graphic scenes, so just know that going into it, which I am personally okay with. I don't mind a little bit of smut in my books. But it is so incredibly, incredibly well written, simple, easy world. You don't have to go into this feeling like you have to take notes on 1,000 different characters in 1,000 different places. You don't have to keep going back to a map trying to figure out where you are in the world. So easy to understand, so easy to jump into. This right here, I think, could really change your mindset on the entire romantasy genre and make you love it. Please read Guild. Next up, you're going to say, Lindsay, why did you put this in a little bit of the spicier category and not in the closed door category? And I do kind of agree with you. However, similar to ACOTAR, I have my reasons, okay? That is Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco. So technically this particular book could have gone over like ACOTAR into the more closed door. However, I did feel like this was a little bit more graphic in like the dirty thoughts department, right? So I could see where someone who reads strictly closed door romance would get a little bit uncomfortable with this one. Even though it's not actually happening, it is written graphically in thought. Also, it also has the same thing as ACOTAR, where Kingdom of the Cursed and Kingdom of the Feared, I've heard, get a lot spicier. So similar to ACOTAR, if you are not comfortable moving forward in the series and it getting a little bit more spice heavy, you probably want to avoid this. Why bother wasting your time reading this if you don't want to read the other ones? But this book is about Amelia and her sister, who are witches secretly living among humans until Vittoria, Amelia's sister, is found dead in a brutal fashion. So Amelia sets out to discover what happened to Vittoria and to take revenge for her sister's death when she meets Wrath, who is one of the princes of hell. She then finds out that Wrath himself has been tasked to figure out what has been going on as a series of murders of young women have been happening across their kingdom, and they team up to do it together. Awesome banter. I really do think I'm going to learn to really love Wrath as the series continues. So this would be a good pining enemies to lovers romantasy for people coming from romance. Next up is going to be for my girlies who read romance but found themselves loving Twilight back in the day, right? Like you got sucked into the Twilight world back then, but then you've kind of fallen back into your comfort zone of romance. I think as long as you don't mind some Omega-verse, if you know, spice, Bride by Ali Hazelwood might be a good option for you. This is a werewolf vampire romance between two rival mafia, kind of like mob gangs in their fantastical world, who are forced into a marriage of convenience to unite their families. It is excellent. I loved the banter. I didn't find it cringy. Some people's criticisms of this has been that the banter and the spice has been cringy. I didn't find that. I really liked it. And if you love Twilight, you definitely would like this. Okay. Hear me out on this one. Don't turn off the video. Just let me talk, okay? Just hear me out. Am I slightly embarrassed to tell you guys how much I like this series? Yes, I am. But also, you know what? Different reading styles is what makes the reading world go round, okay? And I don't care what you say. Ice Planet Barbarians is good. Okay? This is an entertaining, fun series. It's not meant to be serious. Everyone who criticizes it needs to stop taking it so seriously. It's about aliens doing it, guys. Like, it's not that serious. If you go into it expecting this to change your world, that's a you problem, honey. That's a you problem. You went into this with the wrong expectations. This isn't the Iliad, okay? This isn't gonna go down in history as life-changing literature. It's just a smutty alien monster romance good time. However, if you read old school Harlequin romances, or you like the Naked Torso Guy books in the romance genre, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. Everyone knows the Naked Torso Guy books in the romance genre. You're probably gonna eat this up. Just take out the Naked Torso Guy and put in a giant blue alien. There you go. That's it. He has long hair, just like the Fabio guys. So I think you're gonna like this. This is basically about a race of aliens that is stealing young human girls from their beds at night to essentially traffic them on alien planets. And as they are transporting their next shipment of girls to their auction, basically, their ship breaks down and they're forced to eject them while they go and get parts. And the island that these girls are ejected on is inhabited by giant blue ice aliens. And it continues from there because obviously it's smut. So fill in the blanks. However, if you like Naked Torso romance, if you like Fabio romance, you're probably going to eat this up. And it's fantasy because it has aliens. And I think that this might be a good transition for you. But like I said, don't be hating on Ice Planet Barbarians talking about how this doesn't explain your world to you, okay? You're not going to wake up in the morning feeling like you understand the existentialism better because you read this, and you weren't meant to. You were meant to read this and be entertained, okay? I might suggest getting this on your Kindle because I don't know a lot of locations that you would want to hold these covers in. It's kind of embarrassing. These are strictly Kindle reads for me because the covers only get more cringy. However, if you are a Harlequin romance type of girly, this is a great transition into fantasy for you. I don't care what anyone says. Don't listen to the haters. Don't listen to the haters. Just go into it expecting to kind of want to wash your eyeballs out after you're done. And also judging yourself a little bit because you liked it so much. The next book I have is King of Battle and Blood by, is this Scarlett St. Clair? I think it is, Scarlett St. Clair. This is a marriage of convenience to end a war between two kingdoms. Between our female main character and the king of the other kingdom, who happens to be a vampire in his vampire kingdom. I don't want to get too much farther into that, but the writing is solid, the character work is great, and once again, it has a good amount of spice with a good amount of plotline. And if you were an old-fashioned Twilight girly who has now fallen into her comfort zone being romance, this is a really good blend between the two. Next, let's talk about if you are currently primarily a more literary fiction type reader wanting to branch into the fantasy romantasy world, and you're finding yourself a little bit intimidated, not knowing what direction you want to go in. For literary fiction readers, the way that I always feel is that you need a fantasy book that's going to obviously incorporate some fantastical magical elements, right? While also carrying a more serious plot line or a more, not magical realism, that's a bad way to put it, but I think that most literary fiction readers are a bit more analytical than some other readers. So it has to be a world that you can align and have it make sense to you. You have to be able to identify with it a little bit. So that's where my thinking was going when I made these recommendations. So the first book I'm going to start with for that category is The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. This book takes place in our world and is about a reclusive author who has not written a book in, I believe it was like 6 years, who announces that he is going to be writing his next book, but the only way to get the rights to the book is to be invited onto this island to win the rights of this book, to do with whatever you want if you win. And our main female character is a teacher who has fallen in love with a little boy who is currently in a foster home, and her biggest dream is to adopt him as her own. However, she basically doesn't have the income and the housing and the things that she needs to adopt this little boy, Christopher. And the story goes on from there. I think that this is a great blend of real life, analytical problems that need to be solved, while also blending a more fantastical, magical world and trials that I think is a good bridge between literary fiction and more like magical realism fantasy. So I think if you are a literary fiction reader, you might really enjoy The Wishing Game. The next book that I have for my literary fiction readers is The Revenant Games by Margie Fuston. This is a slightly YA closed door. There is no romance in this whatsoever, in my opinion. I mean, I think she has a little bit of an affinity for one of the characters, but it's certainly not a central plot line. About a human village that is situated between rival witch and vampire kingdoms. It's basically fallen into kind of like an uneasy truce and like an uneasy, hesitant peace between all three kingdoms, except for 2 weeks a year when the witches and the vampires select basically like a couple of human tributes to battle to get some sort of benefit if they win in exchange for killing the leaders of the other. That was probably a horribly confusing way of explaining this book, but it's kind of a confusing plot, which is why I think having to use a little bit more brain power is something that literary fiction readers would probably really like. The writing is really solid, and when you're actually making your way through the story, it's told in a very not confusing way. It's just a very complicated plot that I think you might really enjoy. Okay, this book I kind of hemmed and hawed because I knew I wanted to recommend it, but what category of reader I recommended this to, I kind of could go back and forth with. I think that this honestly could work its way into multiple genres of recommendations, but I settled on lit fic, and I think I'm kind of like comfortable. Like, once again, you and I are having a coffee, you're a literary fiction reader. I think I might see how you would identify with this book, so hear me out. That's The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. I think literary fiction readers might like this because the setting of this book is very cool. This, as the name implies, follows our main female character who is the healer in a prison system, but everyone in the prison system has a power. Long story short, a new inmate, quote unquote, comes in that's basically on death's door. I'm pretty sure she's in a coma. And our female main character, Kiva, is tasked with keeping her alive until she can see her trial by death date. It's told very well. The world's very easy to understand. There is that prison system, which is very like realistic. It's very easy to picture in your brain, but with those fantastical elements and with that like death by trials elements, I think that literary fiction readers would really identify with the writing and the prose in this book. Lynette Noni has a very lit fic way of writing and writing style to me. So if we were having a coffee and you were my lit fic friend, I think I would probably recommend The Prison Healer to you. And last but not least is a book that I honestly want to reread because when I first read it, I thought it was okay, but I wasn't absolutely in love with the romance between our main characters, our main female and our main male character. However, it has been traditionally published, and I think some changes have been made to it, and recently it's been making its way around the booktube world, and the booktube girlies are loving it. So I read this when I was new at fantasy and really liked it. Just think I might see it with new eyes now that I have some more experience. So that is Adon of Onx. I really think that if you're into literary fiction, you might connect with the style of this book very well. So basically in this book there are different kingdoms and they each have the name of a gem or like a valuable element. So obviously onyx, peridot, I think there's a jade kingdom in this. And our main female character's brother is currently fighting in a war, but he defects. And in order to protect her brother from being thrown in prison, she is taken captive by the Onyx King, who is supposed to be the most like feared king, and is basically goes to live in his castle. Like I said, I wasn't 100% sold on the romance because I don't think the romance is supposed to be the central plot, but the writing is very solid. The world is developed very well. And I think if you are coming from a literary fiction world, the style of this writing might very much intrigue you. So give it a try. Okay, now let's talk about my mystery thriller readers, whether that is cozy mystery all the way to political thriller. So let's get into what I would recommend if you are a mystery thriller reader wanting to branch into fantasy. First up, let's start with our more like closed door YA introductory reads. The first one I'm going to recommend is CRAVE by Tracy Wolff. This is about our main female character whose parents are tragically killed, and she is sent up to Alaska to live with her new guardian, who is her uncle, who happens to be a headmaster at a remote school, which she then discovers is a school for magical and extraordinary people. I'm going to go with extraordinary. They are creatures, shifters. There's all sorts of magical creatures and powers and elements in this book. And it's written in a very young way, but you really fly through it because the writing is pretty decent. It does have slightly cringy young Hunger Games, Twilight banter. And I mean, obviously, I don't think we can deny the similarities to Twilight in this cover. I really don't think we can. However, it is really intriguing, really good. And if you do love a good thriller, you are constantly on your toes in this series. This girl cannot walk around a corner without something trying to kill her. Next up on our more YA recommendations for mystery thriller readers, or cozy mystery, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw in Eragon. Once again, this was a book that probably could have made its way into multiple categories. However, I think if you're a mystery, maybe not thriller, this is more epic high fantasy mystery. Maybe if you're a mystery reader, you might be really intrigued by the element of this story where our main male character is trying to solve exactly what's going on. You know what I'm saying? Like there is the main plot of this storyline is that our main male character, Eragon, is a young boy who stumbles upon something in the woods that turns out to be a dragon egg in a time where dragons are supposed to be extinct. And he basically wants to go on this quest not only to fight this evil king in his world, but also to figure out why dragons were gotten rid of and to overthrow some of the injustices that he sees going on in this kingdom. And the crux of the book is solving a bunch of mysteries that Eragon doesn't himself know. So I think if you are coming from the mystery, maybe leaning a little bit more on like the cozier mystery, although there are some high stakes in this book, it is a little bit more meandering and YA. I think you might actually really enjoy this book. Our main male character Eragon and his friend, as well as his dragon Saphira, they really do take a place of your heart, and you really do find yourself super attached to them as characters and wanting to solve the mysteries of the world along with them. So I think closed door YA, good introduction for somebody who comes from reading a lot of mystery, cozy mystery type of genre. Next up is absolutely a recommendation I would make to a friend having coffee with me who specifically reads cozy mysteries only. Cozy mystery is her thing. She wants to break into fantasy. What's a good bridge between cozy mystery and fantasy? Legends and Lattes is a perfect book for you. This book is low stakes. There are stakes. There are some people that say like there are no stakes in this book. I completely disagree. There are actually like bad elements of this town that our main female character has to like more or less fend off. So there are some stakes. There's a little tiny little hint of danger. Not much, but this is about our main female character, who is an orc who used to be fighting in wars, a very dangerous war orc, if you will. And she decides that she no longer wants to live the fast-paced, dangerous life of war. And she wants to retire to a cute little village and open a coffee shop and live the rest of her days serving coffee and living a nice, quiet life. The problem is, in this village and in this world, nobody has ever heard of coffee. So this whole story follows her just trying to open up a coffee shop and teach people about coffee, which, as a coffee lover, I really liked. It was short, a quick read, and very cute. And I think if you are a specifically cozy mystery reader, you will love Legends and Lattes. Okay, next up, I'm going to recommend An Heir Comes to Rise by Chloe C. Peñaranda to a mystery thriller reader, and here's why. This book is very similar to Hunger Games in its setup, where you have this like elite city that rules over these more common towns with poorer people, and the poorer people are kind of like pawns in the elite's games sometimes. However, our main female character really wants to go to battle. Her biggest goal is just to wield a sword, is basically how she says it. And she stumbles upon an assassin elite one day, and they strike up a friendship, and I don't want to give away too much, but there's a lot of mysteries going on within this kingdom, and she decides that together they could probably try to bring down the elites. However, as you read the book and as the story goes on, you realize that there's kind of more going on behind the scenes, and you're trying to work your way through the story with your characters, figuring out exactly what is going on and who these characters really are. And one thing you will find is that all the characters lie to each other. So you're trying to piece together the stories and figure out who's lying. And I think from that aspect, if you have read a lot of murder mysteries where you're trying to figure out who the killer was and who's lying and whose alibis check out, you might actually really identify with the writing style of An Heir Comes to Rise. Last two recommendations are going to be for my mystery thriller readers that don't mind a healthy amount of spice, either right up front or later on in the series. So these two recommendations are a little bit spicier and a little bit more adult, but I think if you're a mystery thriller reader, you might actually really like the way the story is told. So first up, I'm going to recommend the Zodiac Academy series, which is where I would point you to kind of start. This series, if you actually read the entire works, I want to say there's like 16 books, because there's like Darkmoor Academy and what's the other one in between it? I don't remember, plus a bunch of novellas. So you are really taking on a pretty healthy amount of reading if you take on this series. However, I have read book one and really liked it. This book is very similar to like ACOTAR and Kingdom of the Wicked, in that the first book is just a tiny bit more YA, and what you're going to get in it is less like intimate spice and more like bully romance. So there are some scenes where our main female character is bullied and it's a bit uncomfortable. So I think you just kind of have to put on your hat that it's kind of like a bully dynamic. It's not really super spicy, at least not in the first book. So this follows our main female character, who is a Gemini. Her zodiac sign is a Gemini, and hence Zodiac Academy. You do kind of explore the zodiac signs. It does have a lot to do with the storyline. And she is living in the regular human world, working for a theft ring, like a smuggling ring for, I believe it's like car parts or stolen cars, and finds out that she is actually magical and she is actually fae, and she is sent to this Zodiac Academy to learn more about her powers. Now, she is at a disadvantage because obviously the other students that are there have known about their powers and have lived with magical families their entire lives, and she is just discovering as a teenager. I actually don't know how old she is. I don't ever know if it tells you. She's like a 16, probably 17, 18, something like that. She is just discovering that she supposedly is magical and has these powers. So she's at a significant disadvantage, and not everyone at the school is very nice to her or really thinks she belongs there. But when she gets there, she discovers that there's a lot more going on in the world and the kingdom of Solaria than she even knows, because there has been basically like a coup, I think, where like the king has been overthrown and his cabinet members have stepped up to take over his throne while there isn't a seated king. And our main female character discovers that not only is she magical, but her biological parents were like nobles and very powerful in this community, and she might actually be able to claim a stake within this throne. However, she is now at this school with the children of the cabinet members that have been kind of ruling while there's been a lapse in a monarchy or lapse in the kingdom. And they are not exactly excited about her arrival at the prospect that they're going to have to give up their kingdom and their powers. So as you can imagine, the children of the cabinet members that have currently been sitting where they probably don't belong are not exactly that nice to our main female character, and get ready for some severe, God, what do we even say? Some severe behavior. Let's say that. Next up is another specific recommendations of a book that I actually didn't enjoy. Not for me, but if you are this specific reader, it'll probably be for you. If over our coffee you tell me, hey Lindsay, I need a fantasy book recommendation and I read mostly political thrillers, I would probably recommend the Folk of the Air series to you, The Cruel Prce being the first book. I hated this book. I didn't particularly love it. I do want to reread it now because this was another book that I read at the beginning of my fantasy journey and I think I just didn't get it. And now I think I might get it. I also stumbled into this book thinking it was another book. So for the first half of the book, I was super confused about what I was reading, and I think that might have perhaps put just a small bad taste in my mouth for it. So I have been meaning that if I ever get a reread prompt from our prompt reel, this would probably be one of my options for that. And I'm wondering if, with some fantasy experience under my belt, but also going into it with the right expectations, if I might enjoy it a little bit more and kind of like get the hype. But I did not care for this book. The writing is fine. It has nothing to do with the writing. It was just sold to me as a romance fantasy, and it is not. It is not a romance. Say it with me. This is not a romance. At least not The Cruel Prce, because I didn't move on because I didn't like it. But if anyone sells this to you as a romantasy, that is why you're going to hate the fantasy genre, because this is not a good romantasy recommendation. This is all political fantasy. This is intrigue in the kingdoms, war, betrayal, political motivations, who's going to overthrow. I mean, this almost is more like Game of Thrones adjacent to me than romance adjacent. So if you read a lot of political thrillers, I think that you might actually really enjoy the political system and the political intrigue in The Cruel Prce. And last but not least, I'm going to go ahead and recommend The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. We read this as a homey and homely book, and it was really, really fantastic. So this book takes place in one of the coolest magical worlds I've ever read. Our main female character is from like a mainland kingdom, and she is sent as basically as a marriage of political expediency figure to be wed off to the Prince of the Bridge Kingdom, who is this chain of islands connected by bridges. I don't know really how else to describe it. It's a very cool world system. And she discovers when she gets there that her world and the mainland kingdoms are not as they seemed, and there might be more going on than she understands in the way of maybe not sending shipments of food to the other kingdoms that they say they are, or maybe taking part in some arms smuggling just for a couple of things that you're going to discover. And I think that if you're a mystery reader, you're really going to like figuring out exactly what's going on for real between these kingdoms. So there you go, guys. That's it. If we were having a coffee and you told me you wanted to get into the fantasy genre, those are the books that I would recommend for you based on your current comfort zone in reading. Tell me below if you think I missed any, or any other genres or tropes or micro tropes that I missed, because maybe I could do a follow-up video getting super specific. So comment below if you've been wanting to get into fantasy and you've just been intimidated or scared or kind of didn't know where to start. Comment some genres that you want me to cover, or even some tropes. Say, for example, you have a very specific trope or micro trope in a book that you find is always making something a 5-star read for you, and you don't know what the fantasy equivalent to that would be. Drop it below and I will definitely put together some recommendations for you. Maybe I can even, sip a coffee with you while you watch, and we can pretend that we're doing this in person at a coffee shop, talking about books and what you might like as a lover of fantasy that I am. So if you have made it this far, what emoji should we drop today? Let's think. Go ahead and drop the dragon emoji for Aragon, because that is one of my favorite little bridge fantasy books into the genre. And then go ahead and do all the things that you guys are professional doing, like, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye guys.